Welcome to part 5 of our series on Falling Flat, book by Danny Faulkner. And today we're going to pick up on his section, The North Star and Other Circumpolar Stars. And last time we ended with the note for the first part of this section, which was the horizon is the horizontal plane tangent to the Earth at one's location, and how this presumes you're on something round, and that this imaginary line is going to tell you anything about what you're standing on. If you presume you're standing on something, a circle or a ball, either one can have a tangent, but in this case, obviously it's a ball that they're talking about. Then you are the tangent point, and what good does this do you, since you're trying to figure out what you're standing on, not presuming what you're standing on and drawing imaginary lines from it. So we're going to start with the second sentence here in the notes, that is where he says, "You may have noticed that planetariums have hemispherical ceilings. This makes a good backdrop on which to project images that mimic what the sky looks like." And my note, of course, is the observers all sit in chairs on the floor, a flat plane, and the sky moves around it. Thanks, Danny. You're demonstrating that you can't tell whether it's you on a ball spinning around or you sitting on a flat plane watching the sky spin around. And Einstein said as much, that you can't tell who is moving. And it's all relative, pun intended, anyway, because according to modern cosmology, which is based on Big Bang theory, which is highly tied to evolutionary theory, and any atheist can get on board with it. According to all of that, everything is in motion. Therefore, there is no fixed reference to gauge the speed of anything. So just keep that in mind as we go through the book or any other conversation you'd have on this topic. And then he says, due to Earth's rotation, the celestial sphere appears to spin around the Earth each day. Appears to spin around the Earth, just like the planetarium. So what's actually happening there, as opposed to presupposing that everything only appears that way because the floor is a spinning ball? That's what he's arguing. And then he says, in the flat Earth model, the Earth is round and flat with the North Pole at its center. He's still assuming a flat disk in space, which he knows is not what most flat earthers believe, and is presenting it to the audience, his audience, wayward Christians who aren't very bright or are not very well studied. He's telling them that this is what flat earthers believe, and he knows that's not true. Now, as far as the North Pole at the center, north is always toward Polaris. Okay, and Polaris is supposedly 90 degrees, wherever that GP is, that ground position, 90 degrees overhead. If you could get to that spot on the Earth, it's in the Arctic Circle, and you could look straight up 90 degrees, you would see Polaris. And latitude lines, as I've said in a video many years ago on tracking the luminaries on a budget, latitude lines are simply the angle from your spot to Polaris. If you look north from your location, you will see Polaris. At least you can see it a little bit beyond the equator going south, but that's where they get the zero angles, where you can just, where Polaris is right on the horizon. Anyway, he's making these assumptions, and he's speaking of a radius, which presumes a circle. And again, the flat Earth community does not specify that Earth is circular, although the Bible does seem to present it as such. And he has a little drawing you can look at in my copy, page 114 out of 378, where he illustrates these things. He has a couple more diagrams. And then we get to what appears to be page 116, or thereabouts. Like I said, these page numbers just don't match up. Anyway, he says, how well do these predictions of the flat Earth model match what we see in the sky? Which flat Earth model? The Flat Earth Society flying disc? The one whose dimensions you presume with a radius? Which so-called model? Do flat earthers claim to have a model besides the Flat Earth Society? Did it claim to make predictions? Lots of questions. But then he goes on, however, in the flat Earth model, there is no south celestial pole, so this cannot happen. Again, he's ignoring optics and atmospheric lensing, which I should point out, if I haven't already, atmosphere is an oxymoron because atmo is from the Greek word for air. Sphere means obviously a sphere. Air, like any other gas, does not have a shape. So to call something atmospheric is to presume it's being constrained into a sphere shape, which is begging the question. Anyway, we'll use the term because everybody knows what we mean. It's the air we breathe. But just to make note of the fact that this is not technically accurate, which I would expect better from a PhD in astronomy, or at least to have defined the terms and said we're going to use this term because it's widely understood. That didn't happen. But anyway, what does he mean by a celestial pole? Now, you could, and I think we'll get into this later in the book again, but if you do a look at a star trail photo where normally they point at Polaris and all the other stars form concentric circles around it, and as you get toward the equator, of course, the stars are going in straight lines, and then they curve back around looking south until you look at the south where there's no pole star there, but a point, imaginary point at which the stars appear to go around. That's what he is referring to as a south celestial pole. Celestial means heavenly, whereas terrestrial from terra means earthly. So he's talking not about Earth shape at all. He's talking about the sky, which is his supposed area of expertise. But again, we're trying to figure out what we're standing on, not what we're not standing on. Anyway, there are other factors such as the optics and lensing and stuff like that, so we'll get back to that later. And then he says, this fact, along with adverse conditions near the horizon, such as obstructions, would make practical observations very difficult. Only now does Danny admit that there are obstructions, which deflate his argument, which amounts to, why can't I see the Alps from New York? People say that all the time. They say, well, if Earth were flat, then we should be able to see that. But there are obstructions, which everyone agrees to. There are buildings, there are trees, there are clouds, and there is no unobstructed view that long on the Earth. So, since there are obstructions, no one, no matter how powerful a telescope they might have, would be able to see that long of a distance. So, practical observations are very difficult along the surface of Earth. That we all agree on, but what does that tell us about trying to figure out Earth shape from the Earth? So if there are no practical observations, then you cannot do the first step in trying to be quote-unquote scientific, which is to observe a natural phenomenon. Observation. So if observation is difficult, then you're stuck. You're stuck at that point. You cannot do quote-unquote science anymore in this question about seeing far. Okay, so now we're going to go on to a statement he says, and he shows in his book before this star trail photo taken at the Ark Museum in Kentucky, run by Answers in Genesis, which apparently the North Star, the Ark itself is pointing, it looks like, not quite east-west, but north-south, northeast, southwest, or something like that. It's hard to say from there. But anyway, a nice photo op for Answers in Genesis, but it doesn't prove what we're standing on. So he says about star trails, as the Earth spins, a person's position changes, begging the question, so minutely compared to the distance of the stars that the stars will appear to maintain a constant angular radius from the north celestial pole. That works if the Earth only spins in place, and never orbits the sun. Is he actually claiming that the distance from one extreme to the other, that is to say, the Earth's alleged orbit around the sun, is insignificant because the stars are so far away? If so, this is an ad hoc fallacy, since the presumed distance is proposed only to explain away the great lateral distance the Earth is supposed to be moving through the seasons. That is to say, if you're on, quote, just for ease of explanation, the left side of the sun, and then 6 months later the right side, this supposedly gives you a long straight line between your two positions, but that doesn't happen because not only are you allegedly orbiting the sun, you're orbiting it in a spiral because the sun itself is moving, allegedly, apparently, toward Polaris. Because we can take these star trail photos with Polaris at the center. And by the way, yes, Polaris does move in a tiny, tiny circle. But to the naked eye, it's just a singular point. And to the naked eye, that's how people navigated the Earth for thousands of years without a telescope. For all they knew, that Polaris was stationary and didn't move at all, and it worked. Because the tiny movement isn't significant to navigation. But the point here is that he's saying the person's position on this spiraling Earth doesn't move enough to make any difference in angular radius from the North Celestial Pole. But again, as I had in the, and I'll see if I can show that real quick, my thumbnail, on the left side of the thumbnail, we have the Bible's depiction of our created realm, and on the right side, we have the sun hurtling through space with the Earth spiraling around it and the moon spiraling around the Earth, because nothing is just, the sun is not holding still. Since the sun is not holding still, and it is presumed to be going in a straight line at a very high speed, and the Earth's axis of rotation is not stationary, how can he make these claims? Because if the Earth is going around and around over the period of a year and is never in the same place twice, you can't do anything with that as a baseline of anything, any measurement. So, going on to the next note, he says in the accompanying figure, the flat Earth is a disk with the North Pole indicated by NP at its center in his little diagram. Again with the disk, it seems Danny only ever has the Flat Earth Society in mind. He should have said that he's aiming at them, which is a giant straw man burning, because it is not the typical view. This is several different fallacies, but the point is, he knows that the people he names in the book, besides Dubé, he's Flat Earth Society, as far as I know, the other people he names in the book don't believe any of this. And yet he has named them falsely. This is slander, because this isn't any position they've ever expressed. Then he says, the point is, since the angles alpha and beta in his diagram are different, star trails predicted from the flat Earth model are decidedly not circular, but rather some complicated loop. Seriously? We don't make any such claim. Flat Earthers don't make any such claim about any elliptical star trails. And he says further on, I don't have a note for it, he says, I used the Stargazers Planetarium at the Creation Museum. I have been there. I've seen the program several times. What sort of star trails the flat Earth model predicts? No, this is his made-up straw man that he's burning. So if you go there and they show that, I don't remember, it's been a while since I've been there, whether they showed the alleged, what would be for his Flat Earth Society model. Just remember that this is a straw man that he's burning, which again, if you don't know the term, burning a straw man is a fallacy where you take an argument your opponent has not made and destroy it in an effort to try to portray your opponent as easily defeated. So he's burning a straw man. Anyway, he presumes that a dome spins exactly parallel to Earth's surface in getting these elliptics. If he has any clue what shape a dome is, which he does because he allegedly had a hand in designing this planetarium at the museum, then the stars aren't on a flat celestial plane, but on an arc, which doesn't result in distorted non-circular star trails. We've been over this. I mean, is it a dome? Is it a flat ceiling? He doesn't know. Now to his next note, however, as demonstrated here in his book with the flat Earth model, the straw man one, the angular distance from the NCP would change throughout the night, so the stars would drift in the north-south direction. Where did he demonstrate any such thing? The previous attempt to make the sky dome flat that nobody believes? Keep in mind what he has not done in this book is accurately quote flat earthers, besides, as I said, perhaps Eric Dubé, who is not the sum total of anything but the Flat Earth Society. But he says this is not the case, so the Flat Earth model must be false, declaring victory again against his straw man and another non sequitur. It does not follow. That's what non sequitur means in Latin. It does not follow. So he thinks he's debunked something, but all he's done is burn his straw man. And I can't say that enough, I guess. Then he talks about a figure in his book where he shows the time of day of the Earth going around the sun. And it says it has the sun in the middle and 4 pictures of Earth on north, south, east, west of that sun in the middle, all at noon. Okay, so on the left, right, the east, west, you have the Earth half shaded vertically. You know, the left half is shaded, the right half is not shaded, so shade is nighttime. And then, in other words, everywhere that the ball Earth orbits the sun, the side facing the sun is lit up. That's pretty basic. But he says that his image in his book shows a meme taken from someone called Nick Havock's Facebook page, and it begins with a certain statement. He says the Earth makes a full rotation every 24 hours, and then we'll face the same direction at 12 p.m. no matter where it is. This is another bad argument. Yes, some people in Flat Earth have made it, but it's certainly not typical and not up to date, even at the time of the writing of this book. So basically the argument was that Earth's day and night would be reversed. This is not what anybody believes. He's doing what's called picking the low-hanging fruit. The worst arguments, he couldn't stand against the best arguments, so he picks the worst ones, which most people in the Flat Earth community have abandoned a long time ago. Anyway, the next note I have is that stars to the right of the figure will now be visible, but stars on the left will not be visible. Danny and the meme both miss the point. The time of day isn't relevant. The real problem for Danny is that regardless of the hour, in opposite seasons, the dark side of Earth faces a completely different set of stars with no possible overlap. So the problem, as I can best describe it, is if the sun is, as I mentioned before, on one side of the sun, or the Earth is on one side of the sun, and then 6 months later it's on the other side, nighttime is always away from the sun, right? So nighttime, picture the sun in the middle and the Earth on the left side. The right side of the little Earth is lit up because it's facing the sun. The left side of the little Earth is pointing the opposite way, 180 degrees away from the sun, right? There's a set of stars out that way. Well, 6 months later, even if the sun were standing still, 6 months later, the Earth is on the other side, so nighttime and the star field are 180 degrees out. So it's not whether it's day or night on the Earth at a certain time, it's whether the side pointing away from the sun is seeing the same set of stars. It can't be. They're 180 degrees out. Not only that, but considering that the Earth is spiraling, you should never see the same set of stars, especially over, say, 100 years. The constellations would lose their shapes. The only thing that quote-unquote saves the heliocentric model at this point is making the stars extremely far away, almost infinitely far away, as one scientist, so-called in the past, concluded that these things must be infinitely far away, which is preposterous. Infinity only works in math when you're talking about distance. But the problem, again, is that since it has to assume that, then they make the stars incredibly large so that we can explain why we see them. This is where it comes from. This is the basis of their model, is that stars must be huge because they're so far away and we can still see them. And they have to be far away or we would not see the same stars 100 years, 1,000 years apart. So this is a house of cards. So let's go on here to some more notes. And he says, let me see, I think I've skipped ahead of something here. Okay. Rather than disproving the conventional cosmology, flat earthers who employ this argument, which argument? The straw man one, have stumbled upon the reason why stars we see at night change with the seasons. Nobody says they don't change with seasons, but they keep coming back, don't they? It's a rotation of the seasons. We see the same stars. We know what to expect in the summer sky, the winter sky, and so on. So what Danny completely failed to test would be having a drone hover in place to take the star trail images. Detached from the spinning Earth, there should be no trails at all. And the drone should drift away from its spot at Earth as Earth spins beneath it. I think this has been done. I can't seem to find it anymore on YouTube. But that's all anyone would have to do. It's not an expensive test. It is time-consuming, but it as no more so than any other star trail photograph. So all you have to do is get something off the spinning Earth. And given that the mass of the drone is far less than the Earth, it will not keep its so-called angular momentum. And even if it did, it would not keep in a circular path unless it's tethered to the Earth. Anybody can test this. Any physics class where you put a weight on a string and spin it around over your head, as soon as you let go of that string, the object goes in a straight line, a tangent, if you will, when you let go, because it's not being tethered to the center point of the spin. Likewise, if you have also a difference in mass, is what I need to explain more, the loss of momentum will be quicker in the lower mass object compared to the Earth's much greater mass. So you can't expect it to hover in one spot. It will drift backwards from the direction of Earth's rotation. This does not happen. Go ahead and try it yourself. Put up a drone, have it hover in place, and do a star trail photography bit. This will take hours. But keep the drone in that space. You will not see star trails if Earth is what's spinning. But if you do see star trails from the drone, then Earth is not the thing that's moving. It's that simple to prove. Danny has not done this. I can imagine why, but I'm not going to speculate. So, he says, therefore, flat earthers conclude belief in the conventional cosmology is a form of pagan worship, the sort of thing that Scripture forbids. Here is a very slight reference to Scripture. And yes, the Bible does forbid the worship of the sun, moon, and stars. But whose model is heliocentric? Whose model is based on the sun having everything else bow to it? If you want to go pagan history and smearing, which is what this is an attempt to smear, that's all you've got. As I say in my note, clearly the book is not so much about Earth shape as about the people who disagree with his model, and every bit of unorthodox detail even a few of them have besides that. Shouldn't we therefore put Danny and any other mainstream astronomer under the same microscope? I wonder what we'd find. And that's kind of what we're doing here, even though this isn't a very powerful microscope. I could go spend a lot more detail, and I'll leave that to others, but what we've seen so far, even at the surface level, is telling us quite a bit about the intentions, the real intentions of the book, as stated by the author, is fear of flat Earth making Christians look stupid and unscientific, which, as I've pointed out, is ironically already the case with young Earthers, like Danny Faulkner in Answers in Genesis. So, again, the problem is that plus very bad logic and misquoting, misrepresenting deliberately, because, as I've said before, the author cannot claim ignorance. So, he says, going on here from this quote, he says, first, this confuses the question of Earth's shape and whether the Earth orbits the sun, heliocentrism, which is the pagan view. Then he literally just said that conventional cosmology is the point here. So how does this amount to any sort of confusion between shape and motion? Here again, it's Danny, not flat earthers, who confuses the two and who can't even stay on his own topic from one sentence to the next. Then we go on, the cosmology of ancient Egypt was very much that of a flat earth with a dome over the top. Hasn't Danny spent all of the book so far arguing that pretty much nobody in the ancient world believed Earth was flat? Oh, that was the Greeks, I guess. These are the Egyptians. So why has he been appealing so much to the Greeks when it supports him and ignoring the Egyptians until now, which he is saying only to smear flat earthers as having the pagan belief, which is also called a tu quoque fallacy, you too, that's what it means. And he's saying, oh yeah, we're not pagan, you're pagan. Playground tactics. And then furthermore, he says, flat earthers call this worship of Helios, but Helios was the Greek god of the sun. Doesn't matter whose language you use. Helios is Ra, equivalent in ancient Egypt. Many different names for the sun, just as there are many different names for the moon and all the luminaries. The Bible simply calls them the greater light and the lesser light. So this is not even really worth pointing out at this point because it's so juvenile. Anyway, he says, if anything, it is the flat earthers who have adopted the pagan cosmology of ancient Egypt. Oh, it's okay to adopt the pagan cosmology of ancient Greece, I guess. It is very bold for them to accuse others of what they're guilty of. So because Danny finally admitted that some ancients believed Earth is flat, then nobody can point to the pagan origins of heliocentrism. As I mentioned, that's the tu quoque fallacy, not to mention exposing his own hypocrisy as shown earlier regarding the charges made against young Earth creationism by old Earthers. Then he talks about parallax. And I've mentioned that briefly before. If the Earth orbits the sun, then we view the stars from different vantage points throughout the year. Consequently, the apparent positions of stars ought to shift on an annual basis, an effect we call parallax. Where's this parallax when we view Polaris? The excuse is in the next paragraph, where he says some ancient astronomers considered the heliocentric theory and they were aware of this prediction. Consequently, ancient astronomers looked for parallax. When they didn't see parallax, being good scientists, most ancient astronomers concluded Earth did not orbit the sun. A few thought otherwise. So how do they explain the lack of parallax? They reasoned that the stars were so far away that stellar parallax was too small to measure. It turns out they were right. Really? This is an ad hoc fallacy, and it begs the question. It attempts to explain away the failed prediction by invoking great distance, the equivalent of in time anything can happen in evolutionary theory. This is unfalsifiable, as Answers in Genesis and any other young Earth creationist ministry will tell you. Evolutionary theory isn't scientific because it's not falsifiable. They will believe in it no matter what they discover and make an ad hoc fallacy to explain it away. This is exactly what heliocentrism, and Danny in particular, is doing in this case. The stars are too far away. That's the same bad logic and the double standard that we've become so familiar with. He says Occam's razor suggested that the heliocentric model was more likely correct. Danny has spent the book so far giving formulas and complicated theories about the cosmos Occam's razor is only invoked when it's convenient. And science isn't being done when you reach a conclusion just because it's allegedly simpler than some other explanation, especially when it happens to be your preferred theory. Science doesn't care about Occam's razor. That's a rule of thumb, as I explained in an earlier video. And then he says Venus could not do this in the Ptolemaic model because its phases could be explained only if Venus orbited the sun. Therefore, Earth isn't flat? Or is he arguing against geocentrism again? Who keeps confusing the two? And then he says, finally, there was the elegant Newtonian physics that gave a very powerful theory as to how the sun's gravity compelled the Earth, the other planets, and comets to orbit the sun. Gravity, the wild card of heliocentrism, analogous to mutation and evolutionary theory. They're the same thing, logically. According to a link I have here, which I hope to remember to put in the video description, it says, it's from Forbes.com, and it says, when did Isaac Newton finally fail? Newton's gravity was superseded by Einstein's general relativity. That means replaced. Newton's laws are practical for slow or stationary objects, but they fail at astronomical scale and speed, which is presumed. According to another link in Scientific American, the three-body problem, Isaac Newton first posed this problem along with the simpler two-body problem later. In the case of three bodies, the question was found to be practically unsolvable. It's essentially impossible to find a formula to exactly predict their orbits. What about Occam's razor? Where'd that go? Apparently nobody cares. Now, this sort of thing, he says, baffled someone named Bradley for a while, but eventually he realized that this was a consequence of the, get this, finite speed of light. Another failed prediction, another ad hoc fallacy. According to yet another link in Scientific American, why isn't the speed of light doing what they presume it to do? The speed of light is strange in that it has the same value independent of the relative velocity between the source and the observer. Everything's in motion, remember? This fact is an experimental one that can only make sense if relative motion changes the relationship between space and time intervals to keep the distance covered by light per unit time the same for all observers. End quote. So the relative motion just so happens to exactly match the amount of parallax expected. This is very convenient. But now he's going to completely destroy his own point. He goes on about page 130 to say, proper motion is determined by comparing precise measurements of stellar position over several decades. Remember what the Earth is doing? See this thing I still have on the screen? I'll take that down now so we can follow along in the notes again. But how is that working? Proper motion is determined by tracking stellar position over several decades. So Danny has proposed and then discarded aberration of starlight as stellar parallax in favor of proper motion, which is just careful observation over decades, something the ancients could do also without regard for either Earth's shape or motion, the two things that Danny keeps conflating. And then he says, for a given velocity in space, a nearby star will have greater proper motion than a more distant star. This isn't affirming the consequent fallacy. For example, if the lamp were broken, then the room would be dark. The room is dark, so the lamp is broken. Likewise, Danny argues, if the star is nearer than others, it will have greater proper motion than a more distant star. The star has greater proper motion, therefore it's nearer. In which he also begs the questions of velocity and space. So many variables that just happen to work out, just like it just happens that the moon and the sun appear to be the same exact size, or very close. Then he says, however, the greatest boon has been getting above the Earth's atmosphere. In NASA we trust, eh, Danny? He admits we're limited by atmospheric distortion, but must presume his space model to overcome the problem. And then he says, he's talking about Eric Dubé again. He says, therefore, it's a mystery as to why what Tycho Brahe thought on this matter is irrelevant. Also notice that Dubé's response is simply to assert that there have been no parallax measurements. He offered no proof. He offered no evidence. He offered no refutation. Pot, meat, kettle. Who else has not been doing those things? And then he says, since they firmly believe that Earth is an unmoving flat disk, only Eric Dubé might believe that, the Flat Earth Society, with a dome over the top, there can be no stellar parallax. Wrong again, Danny. It isn't a disk, and we don't presuppose that there can be no parallax. We just observe. But you say we must go to outer space to really see parallax. And by the way, we should point out that it is known, a law in physics concerning gas, that gas will expand to fit whatever space it can until it is stopped by some container. If you have gas pressure, you have a container. You cannot measure gas pressure without a container. Therefore, if there is gas pressure, a container must exist. This is gas law, not something flat earthers made up. And there are demonstrations where you have a glass tube with two bulbs on the ends and a divider in the middle of the tube, and one half of the apparatus is filled with a gas that's visible, and the other half has had all air removed from it, so that it's, as far as any practicality goes, a vacuum. And the point of a vacuum is that it's a very much lower pressure than some other contained space. And you can't have a vacuum either without a container, because gas fills space. As soon as they remove the divider in that glass rod, the gas rushes over to the other side and equalizes between the two so that there's equal gas pressure throughout the apparatus. So how can outer space exist as an extremely much lower pressure that they call a vacuum most of the time, compared to the air we breathe, which has to be under pressure in order for us to breathe it? Why doesn't the air that we breathe rush out into space in all directions? That's what gas must do. There are no exceptions to this law on Earth in any observation. It's impossible, even in theory, for uncontained gas to just stay in place and have pressure. Anyway, moving on. He talks again about a book called Zetetic Astronomy by Robotham. We've met him before. And he says his discussion amounts to mining of sources from about the time the first parallax measurement were made, from which he concluded that no parallax measurements exist. You mean he shouldn't cherry pick like you do, Danny? Pots and kettles again. And then he says two can play that game, and there's again the tu quoque fallacy. Why is he arguing like a little kid on a playground? Well, I'm not the bully, you're the bully. All right, moving on, under historic measurements of the speed of light, he says Ole Rammer's 1675 discovery that the timing of eclipses of Io, the innermost Galilean satellite of Jupiter, had a periodicity that was in phase with Jupiter's changing distance from the sun. This indicated that it took time for light to travel across Earth's orbit. As in the rest of the section, it's all based on the presumption of the heliocentric model in the first place. One must know the distances before doing the calculations, and those distances are not measured, they're only calculated. A calculation is not a measurement. And then we're going to move on a few pages here, and he says, he's still on this topic, he says, how does this all relate to the flat Earth discussion? That's an excellent question for a lot of things. Direct measurement of the speed of light on Earth is consistent with the speed of light implied by the assumed aberration of starlight. And then he says, furthermore, light travel time required by the timings of eclipses of Io and eclipses of other satellites of the solar system by their planets, as well as the timings of eclipses of eclipsing binary stars, are consistent with the speed of light, but only if the scale of the solar system is properly understood, with an astronomical unit, AU, being 150 million kilometers or 93 million miles. Wow, we could just stop right there and say, hold on a minute. Occam's razor has flown out the window, never to return. And we're begging the question once again. And making up numbers that just try to presume that in a heliocentric model, we must have these distances. But these distances are far too great for the flat Earth cosmology to accommodate, he says. For instance, it requires, and here's our quote, that the sun be 93 million miles away, but flat Earth cosmology places the sun only a few thousand miles above the Earth's surface. Again, there is no officially stated or required distance to the sun for flat Earth. And again, all those astronomical calculations presume their model. We've gotten nowhere in all this verbiage so far. And then he says, flat earthers don't appear to be aware of these facts. That's a lie, and he knows it. So we don't know what their response might be. In all these years, you haven't told them any? And how many flat earthers have you asked about it? Are we supposed to be perplexed about light speed because it works in your model? So you say. You made it work. You force-fitted it. But how can anyone who brags on the fact that he spent so much time in the flat earth community and even gone to conferences and sits in a major flat earth Discord server day after day, listening allegedly, how can he not know what the response might be? He can't. He does know. And then he says, very bombastically, when flat earthers are confronted with these sorts of arguments, you mean fallacies, the most common response is to ignore them. Didn't you just say that flat earthers aren't even aware of your facts and you don't know how they'd respond? Now you know how they react when confronted? Talk about self-contradiction. This is a case study in it. Is it part of some nefarious plot to mislead the world about the Earth's true shape? The old, all those people would have to be in on it nonsense. You can make that argument about Santa Claus. I have a meme of that, where a mother is talking to her little child who is asking if Santa is real, and the mother says, "Of course he is, dear. How could so many people be lying to you?" But we've seen how many conspiracies Danny believes in too, so I'll just leave that sitting there. That's all you can do with it. Then he says, therefore, if flat earthers are correct, then I must be lying about this as well. Hence, I must be part of the conspiracy. He says this is nonsense. But I say, whether lying or just in denial of his stated fears, the result is confirmation bias and ad hominem. But again, he cannot claim ignorance. He cannot plead ignorance. He cannot say that he didn't know something. He claims to be a subject matter expert on flat Earth. If you want to talk about nonsense, again, pots and kettles. Then he shows the Gleason map, which is very much like that UN map, which I'm just saving images here, so we'll see if we can get the slideshow to move. Let me try that again. Sorry about that. Well, it's here somewhere. It's not moving where I want. You remember the UN map, which has, there we go, I finally got the controls to work, which has this. That's basically an azimuthal equidistant map. That's pretty much the Gleason map, which is an older map, and it is much more detailed. It has everything, numbers marked, and it shows all the continents in detail as much as you can on a chart, etc. So that's what map he's talking about when he says Gleason's map. Okay? And he says, this was after the one about lying. Okay, so let me go on in the book here. He says, flat earthers also don't think that what lies beyond the ice wall of Antarctica has been mapped. He doesn't name anybody, no citations. He just says flat earthers. Which ones? Flat Earth Society? not Flat Earth Society? Anyone you've named in the book? Does every one of them believe in an ice wall? Or that there's stuff beyond it? There is an infinite plane idea, but it's certainly not the majority view, or anything you could call as representative of the unnamed flat earthers you keep talking about. In my opinion, I don't believe there is a infinite plane, because that's just a flattened out heliocentrism, since it makes Earth insignificant. I know what the Bible says about Earth. That's why I reject the infinite plane model, not to mention the fact that no one has been there. It's imaginary, it's hypothetical. I'm not dealing in hypotheticals here. Then he says there's a test. All right? He does a bunch of math and things for pages and pages, math. And he gets to this one paragraph, says, a good test between the two models of the Earth. Perth and Sydney, Australia, are at nearly the same latitude, but their separation in longitude is 35.3 degrees. In the United States, Atlanta and Los Angeles are similar distance apart, but it's odd. I think there are only like 2 time zones in Australia, but the United States has 4 on the mainland. How does that work? One's above the north of the equator and one's south. I wonder what that could mean. Anyway, their separation in longitude is 33.8 degrees, about 4% less than between Perth and Sydney. If Australia is stretched as much as the Gleason map indicates, which nobody says, the distorted outer continents on the Gleason map are actually their actual shape. So he's burning a straw man again. This is his test. It's on a straw man. One quickly learns that the flight times are about the same. This test definitely disproves the Gleason map. Which proves exactly what about the surface we actually live on? The purpose of a map is to log locations and distances on the surface, not prove anything about whether that surface is on a giant ball. This is all irrelevant. Then he says, flat earthers appear to accept established measurements of latitude and longitude, though they don't seem to be aware of how latitude and longitude are determined. How do you determine the lines? They're not etched on the ground. And how else can they be determined are 2 different things, Danny. Can a flat circle not have radial or concentric lines? Ever seen a dartboard? And how can you say no flat earthers are aware of any of this? You know very well that they are. Then he says, ultimately, original survey markers were determined by navigation techniques using astronomical bodies such as the sun or stars. Celestial navigation has never been dependent upon the shape of the Earth, but in fact has had to use planar geometry for the use of sextants and other navigational devices. In order to triangulate your position, which is not trilateralization, triangulate your position using a heavenly body, a luminary, you have to have a right triangle. You cannot have such a thing on the surface of a ball. I know there are arguments to the contrary, but they're all very faulty on a number of levels, which I'm not big on illustrations in this thing, and it would be hard to explain without them. But the point is, if you're going to triangulate your position, you must have triangles, and triangles, not spherical geometry here. I would be begging the question anyway. For a sextant to work, you must have straight lines. You must have a straight baseline. And then a 90-degree angle up to the GP, the ground position, where the luminary you're using to navigate by is directly overhead, 90 degrees. You cannot have such a right vertical triangle, vertical, on a ball. And you have to navigate the surface you're living on, not something in the sky, not an imaginary tangent, or a line that bisects the alleged Earth at the alleged presumed halfway point through the center, so you have a diameter, and extend it out and make a right triangle from that. You can't do that. We're not navigating imaginary lines. He says, ultimately, these markers were used, and he doesn't realize that he's just proved planar geometry instead of spherical. And he says, navigation by the stars or sun is done by solving one or more spherical triangles? What's a spherical triangle? I've never seen one. None exist in reality. Sextants don't use spherical geometry, as I explained. This is a blatant lie. The arc in the sextant, it has an arc in it, is no more spherical than a protractor. Why does a protractor have a half circle? Those are angles out from the center point of the protractor, which is on a straight line. To quote yet another website, riggingdoctor.com, Celestial Navigation for Dummies, quote, longitude is a factor of time on Earth. To make this explanation simpler, we need to use an Earth-centric view of the universe. This person is saying you don't use heliocentrism in navigation. Then he gets back to obstructions. He says, if there are no obstructions, such as one large body of water, what? This horizon coincides with the actual horizon, what? Where one's view of the celestial sphere is blocked by the Earth? First of all, we're begging the question again. Most dictionaries say the horizon is the line where the Earth or sea seems to meet the sky. It's apparent, not actual, not physical obstruction. It's simply the limit of vision, as proved by the use of telescopes to increase the distance to the horizon. Only if one assumes standard cosmology does the definition change, and arbitrarily at that. According to Vedantu.com physics, the horizon is a visible line that separates all viewing lines depending on whether or not it intersects the Earth's surface, end quote. Yet if it were a physical obstruction, it would be impossible to look beyond it with a telescope. So if you tell me that at 6 feet of height of the eye over the surface you're standing on, say at the beach, at the edge of the water, so you're at pretty much sea level, so 6 feet above it, if you're a little taller than 6 feet where your eye is, and the boat goes over the horizon, you can see what, like 3 miles? So the Earth is how small? And yet you can put a camera to that same eye and a zoom lens and bring the boat back into view. How is that possible if the Earth was in the way, if the sea was literally, physically blocking your vision? And then he says, as the sun's right ascension and declination, I'm not going to get too deep into the terms here, change throughout the year due to our orbit, that's presuming the cause, the time and azimuth of the rising or setting sun changes. In other words, if you don't know what azimuth is, it's when you have a compass in your hand and you look down at it, that's azimuth you're looking at. It's a horizontal plane where you are the center point. You're facing a certain direction. Say you're facing north. The compass is pointing north, right? That's a magnetic field, by the way, and a weak one at that. So you're looking down at a compass, and it's pointing north, so you're facing north. The azimuth of the sun, if it happens to be the equinox, is going to rise at your right hand, okay? So that's 90 degrees away. A circle is divided into 4 quadrants of 90 degrees each, so 90 degrees is due east. That's what you see at where the sun is rising at the equinox, no matter where you are longitudinally, which is another question all its own. But the fact is, the point is, that the azimuth of the sun at that instance is 90 degrees. Throughout the day, it will keep increasing until it gets to 270. That's 180 degrees out from east. So east to west is a 180 degree line, right? A straight line. And on the equinox, that's where it would set. What it does between those two times is a matter of which way you're facing and how far you are from the equator and which way the equator is to you. But the point is, it has nothing to do with Earth's shape, but you must have straight lines to make any angles. Anyway, if you're looking at a compass, you're looking at a flat plane. It has nothing to do with orbits, which is begging the question again. He's presuming the cause of the effect. The effect is what we see, the cause is what he's presuming. He says if the Earth were not a sphere, then none of this would work. Ooh. Wow, I'm afraid. More specifically, if the Earth were flat, navigation and surveying would not work. This is a baseless, pun intended, assertion. And he'll go on with more ad hominem, but remember, it does work And it doesn't prove Earth shape. If anything, it proves you must have a flat plane because you have an azimuth. You have a flat plane. And he goes on and on for a while, and he says, so much for demonstrating the uniqueness of each star using this method. Whatever method he's been using doesn't matter, because apparently so much for the Bible, Danny. And since most snowflakes look very similar, the idea that no two snowflakes are alike is false because none of them are unique. This is PhD level logic, which he goes on to brag about. As a professional astronomer, and as a person who has used telescopes to view the sky for more than half a century, so have I, Danny, by the way, I immediately recognize that these videos and images are out of focus. He's talking about the watery-looking stars. And on this one point, I can agree. There are many flat earthers who do believe these are in focus, but not all. Some of us have kept pointing out that they're out of focus, but we don't need angular diameters or arc seconds to prove it. Any beginner photographer knows that if you keep turning the focus until the object is at its smallest, that's where focus is. That's how you focus an image. You turn the ring until it gets its smallest, and you keep turning it, and if it starts getting bigger again, you back off a bit. You've got the smallest point. That's the focus point. Okay? People who get the watery-looking, shimmering stars aren't doing that. If you do that, and I have done this, I have gotten the watery, shimmery star look, and I kept turning the focus ring until it got really small, and then it was a point of light. Shocker. So again, he's picking low-hanging fruit in order to try to make himself look better and make all flat earthers look stupid. That sounds an awful lot like what old earthers do to young earthers, Danny. Just keep that in mind. So you're not the only one who's noticed the out-of-focus problem. He talks about being arrogant and ignorant. Likewise, it's arrogant for Danny to dismiss the Bible's own statements about the stars, and ignorant for him not to know how to tell when something's in focus. And remember that old earthers think people like Danny are ignorant and arrogant for thinking they know more than the vast majority of quote-unquote scientists. Now, he talks about a Facebook discussion group who posted some images, and he decided to make a video of his own, pointing toward the star Arcturus, which is fairly easy to find. It's more of a bright star in the sky. It has more, what do they call luminescence? I forget what the actual term is, but he gives the technical details of his camera. People charging each other with which one's images are out of focus. He says focus is not subject to postmodern thinking of no absolutes. I don't know where he pulled that from. There are some people who believe in no absolutes, but I don't know too many people who are like that. Where one person's focus is as good as another, this is complete nonsense, if you want to talk about nonsense. What he's writing, focus is a matter of objective reality. That I agree on. It's in focus or it's not. But he says, I just wasted all my time because none of the flat earthers agreed. I don't know what group he was in. He's on Facebook, and he tells us to stay away from things like YouTube and social media. What's he doing there? Picking low-hanging fruit. He says none of the flat earthers agreed. I don't know who his sampling bias is limited to, but anyway, he says, apparently in my half-century of experience with telescopes are trumped by what someone has put on YouTube. I could say the same thing. I say that a lot about people who say, well, you didn't go to seminary, therefore you can't know anything about the Bible, you're not a preacher. No, my 50-plus years of study mean absolutely nothing to them. Anyway, he says that one woman posted a meme featuring an image taken from a video that she had made of a bright star with her P900. I have a P900. She even connected her photo with the vision of Ezekiel 1:4-26. Another example of unrepresentative sample fallacy. Does Danny think there are no young earthers making bad arguments or ridiculous claims? Do they invalidate young earth? Yeah, I've seen the young earthers make bad arguments. So again, we're not proving anything about earth shape, and we're going to wind this up pretty soon here with this page of notes. And then he says, for that matter, under lunar occultations, which I can read but not say, I've looked at the moon through telescopes probably thousands of times and never seen a star shining through the moon. Neither have I. Does that make me a ball earther? No, I just haven't seen it. I know a lot of people who say they have. I haven't. That's all I can say. And he says, how does that support the idea that the moon is transparent? It's a good question, Danny. Where in that quote does it say transparent in anything he talked about? I, for one, think it's translucent, but that's a video I've done. You can find it on my channel someday. I don't know if I'll remember to put the link for that. And then he says, sadly, some flat earthers recently have unquestioningly repeated these quotes without stopping to read and think about what the quotes actually say. Who's really not stopping to read and think about what the quotes they actually say? Like we demonstrated Danny didn't do with Augustine? And there's still no claim, no hint of a transparency claim. He says, clearly these results match of things that he's done match the prediction of the conventional understanding of the moon, but it contradicts the prediction of flat earth model. Another non sequitur. It does not follow. The alleged flat earth model, if there were one, has nothing to do with the nature of the moon. The book so far is really Danny just taking pot shots at every little thing and person associated with flat earth, turning a blind eye to the faults in his own associations. What does Jesus say about the plank in your own eye? And the final note I have here for today, which just happens to finish the section before Blue in the Moon. He says, one possibility is that these bright spots are noise in camera detectors, something that's common with high gain settings. So Danny agrees that bright objects do in fact appear in front of the moon. And he has no idea what they are, but he is comforted by his possibilities that some explanation will be provided or proved in the future, much the way old earthers have faith that someday evolution will actually be proved. And we're going to stop there before the section Blue in the Moon. And again, sadly, we've learned nothing about how to refute these pesky flat earthers, except the low-hanging fruit, which is equivalent of the audience Danny is aiming at with his book, the equally low-hanging fruit on his side or the undecided side, so he can rake them in before flat earthers get to them. That seems to be his stated objection, or objective. His fear, his motive, as he stated himself. So we've seen that he's going after undecided low-hanging fruit and trying to do so by saying, look at the low-hanging fruit over there on the flat earth side. That's not a good tactic for anyone, even an amateur, let alone a PhD with over 50 years experience and all this equipment at his disposal. I would think that Answers in Genesis would be embarrassed. Any young earth creationist, for that matter, trying to be scientific, should be embarrassed by all of these things. And nothing more farcical than the thumbnail that shows the biblical way and then the Faulkner heliocentric way. So we will sadly have to continue this next time, and hopefully this has been of some use to you. Thanks for watching.